Welcome to Knock Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA. Another episode of Let's Get Biblical Q&A with Rabbi Tovia, singer from the Holy Land. Welcome back, Rabbi. How are you today, sir?
I'm like everyone. I think that we're living in a historical time, time of great tribulation.
Right.
There's a lot of people who are hurting right now.
Oh, yeah, from the virus, right?
Oh yeah, well, here in Israel there are 47 people died from this terrible virus, Baruch Amos, and some 7,000 people are stricken with this disease, this relentless disease,
Right.
and many people are mourning alone. And the United States is hit even much harder. And my heart is with those who are struggling right now,
Right.
struggling in a very difficult time. And we're basically locked down in our homes, and this is no doubt a very striking moment in history. It appears consistent with what we find in the Torah, that before the redemption, everyone had to retreat into their homes, doors marked and closed. Exodus chapter 12. But right now, my thoughts are with those who are really struggling with this awful plague that is seized the world. Not only seized the world, but in a sense has taken the power that the world has, its economy, and just brought it to its knees. The entire world has just been shut. All the proud accomplishments and travels and so on halted all over the world. Every person listening to my voice right now is almost certainly quarantined in some way. Can't leave your home unless you're a health worker or in some other unique agency. So this is it's a challenging time, and a time of meditation and thought. And please God that we will see out of this depth of despair, which always marked each and every single redemption, hope is then born out of it. It's not just the Exodus, but it's the building of the first temple and the second temple especially. And at each of those junctures, there was a halt and a time where people really had to reflect on something very special emerged out of it. Not the same thing. I don't think we'll ever go back to what was, but there'll be a new thinking, a unified thought. The true shepherd will emerge. The false shepherds will be destroyed. The true prince will emerge. The false princes will be destroyed. If you think I'm being poetic with you, if you think I'm using some fancy, these are the terms. These are the terms that are used by the prophets of Israel, specifically when speaking of the redemption. Princes all over Ezekiel, from Ezekiel 11 on. Those are the false teachers. Those are the representatives of those who lead others astray. And then there's the true prince. It's called David, but it's the Messiah. At the very end of the book of Ezekiel, shepherd. God will have one shepherd over you. It's all over the prophets, specifically in the context, in a messianic context. You know, one advantage that the English language has, in a sense, over the Hebrew language is that English has capital letters, Hebrew doesn't. So in English, you could when you use the word shepherd, you could capitalize the S. When you use the word prince, for instance, in Ezekiel 37, 24, 25, and Hosea chapter 3, 4, and very specifically 5. So you can capitalize those words to say this is talking about someone very special, someone very, very unique, and set that aside. Now, that also highlights the importance that translators have. They're not translators. We call them translators, but really all translations are commentary, meaning the translator, we hope, is being loyal to his or her reader, but in reality, this is a call that the translator has to italicize. So, and I'll add one other point. The way you can test a person's character and the way character is refined is during a time of vicissitude. The way you can test even things that are material, the distinction between a good knife and a not a very good knife is not when they come out of the store. They're always sharp when you bring it home. The question is, do they hold up? A person's character and loyalty to you. And you think about you in your life. My guess is that very possibly someone has hurt you in your life. Someone has let you down. And when do people let you down? They let you down during times of difficulty, during trials. Otherwise, everyone's just friendly. But that's the way people are tested, is under these conditions. And character is refined under these conditions. And also the sense that of the theme of Psalm 145, a chapter in the Bible you should be saying 3 times a day, where it is not the power of a horse that should impress you. God is not impressed with a man's thigh, meaning strength, physical strength. But God favors those who really fear him, those who are humble, those who are loyal to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Again, a theme all over Tanakh. I mean, don't you want to get into the mind of God in a sense? No, what does God think about this? Well, this is everywhere. So this is a time when the power of our economies and technologies are just brought to a halt worldwide, and everyone is very, very focused right now. So this is a very special time. It's a time of study, and again, there are people listening to my voice right now who know somebody who has been hurt by this virus, who's died by this virus. I am so sorry that you're going through this, and for those who are struggling, I wish you a refuah shleima and encourage you to study Psalm 57 and 58 and Psalm 121 and Psalm 91. These are very important. So anyways, blessings to all the viewers around the world.
Very good. Thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, this is instilled a lot of fear in a lot of people's lives, so just stay safe and stay smart. You know, a lot of people out there, I don't know what stage of life they're in, but they seem to be disregarding the rules that the government's setting forth. But they're smart rules, you know, and they'll keep you safer than just ignoring everything. That's for sure. Okay, so
when people disregarded the rules set forth by the God of Israel during the 10th plague. The 10th plague was like nothing else. They put themselves in harm's way.
That's a great
And those
point.
who were loyal to this command in Exodus 12 were preserved. Absolutely.
That's a great point. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and hit this first question for today. The Palm Sunday is on us in the Christian world right now, on our time marker. So much of the church is actually celebrating Palm Sunday today. What does this holiday tell us about Christianity? That's your question, Rabbi.
So that's a very good question. So Palm Sunday is a really ancient church holiday. It goes back really a long way. And those in, let's say, the Eastern Church are going to wait a week before they celebrate it for a reason that's not germane. And what they are celebrating really is marking the week before Easter when Jesus, they are told in the Gospels, uh, rides on a donkey, or if you're reading Matthew, on donkeys, um, Matthew 21, into Jerusalem, what's called a triumphal entry. So Christians worldwide celebrate this event. And although I mentioned that it's in the Gospel, so you'll find it in Mark 11, Matthew 21, Luke 19, John 12. It's in all the Gospels. What is striking is that the Gospels point to a passage in the book of Zechariah, and they are conveying to the reader with certainty that Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey or on two donkeys in Matthew 21 is a fulfillment of a prophecy that was written roughly 500 years earlier. In the book of Zechariah, Zechariah was a prophet who lived at the very beginning of the Second Temple period. There were two other notable prophets at that time, Haggai and Malachi. Those are the only three prophets who lived in the early part of the Second Temple, in the Second Temple period during the Persian Empire. What is very notable about this festivity, about these passages, is not the contradiction between Matthew and Luke. It's not real. I don't want you to think about that Matthew misreads Zechariah 9:9, where the passage says that referring to the Messiah, although the word Messiah is not used, but your king is coming, and he is just, he's victorious, he's humble, he's riding a donkey, the foal of a donkey. So there's a parallel type of writing that's very common, and Matthew misreads that as two animals and writes a story that way. And it's very tempting to be drawn to comparing that to Luke 19:29 through 35. That's what's very tempting. And it's striking because it tells you how the stories were formed. I'm not going to spend time on this because Matthew is reading Zechariah 9:9, and he just misreads it and then forges his story to adapt to what he thinks the text reads. So you could see then it becomes transparent in how stories in the New Testament are written. They want Jesus to have done something, and then the story is formed to make him do it. And Matthew, the question you might have is, Matthew is quoting almost all the book of Mark. Matthew, whoever wrote Matthew, had the book of Mark in front of him. You can be absolutely certain of that. And you might be tempted to ask, well, didn't he see what Mark said in chapter 11? And then why didn't he question it? Well, as it turns out, although we say that Matthew quoted almost all of Mark, Luke even more so, but both Matthew and Luke, while quoting almost all the book of Luke, not all 678 verses, but just about all of them, they're always correcting Mark. And whenever there is an awkwardness in Mark, they will rewrite it. And they will also heighten the Christology found in Mark. If Mark doesn't present something in a way where Jesus is high enough, they will heighten it. Where Jesus is more revered, is worshipped. I don't mean worshipped as a god, but in the Greek sense of prosekuneo, meaning served, but high level, not necessarily God, but way up there. Below John, but above Mark. So therefore, Matthew is always correcting Mark, as is Luke. They're always refining it. So The fact that Matthew would go, it's two animals, that's of no consequence. But I want to ignore that and go and really focus on what is very significant. As it turns out, uh, even Christian leaders would regrettably admit that Christians don't read the Jewish scriptures very much. I might say, it's too bad. I think most Christian leaders would say, yeah, it's too bad that Christians don't read the Old Testament very much. Here, the consequences for not reading Tanakh, meaning reading Zechariah 9:9 in context, is fatal. Because if someone read Zechariah 9:9 in context, you see exactly what's going on here, and this is the story of the Christian religion. So Zechariah 9 is messianic. And when it says, be very happy, O daughter of Zion, shout, O daughters of Jerusalem, your king is coming, that is about the Mashiach. And he's coming on a donkey. Why does that matter, what he's coming in? What is the significance of the animal that he's riding in on? Well, as it turns out, a donkey is an animal of labor, an animal of peace. It's an animal that's used in hauling heavy things and agriculture and so on. Horses are animals of war. So what is being conveyed is that the Messiah is coming and he's ushering in peace to the world. And that's why a donkey rather than a horse. Now, in case you doubt what I've just said, if you think that this is my homily, it's not. Because it says that in the very next passage, and the very next passage, it must be said, begins with the word v'hechreti, and there's a conjunction, meaning it's continuing. The separation of the verse between Zechariah 9:9 and 9:10 to 9:10 is completely artificial. If you're a Christian, you wouldn't know that. Because if you're a Christian, you don't know what it says in Zechariah 9:10 unless you look it up. Those are harsh words. They're true. And let's stick with the facts. Christians are not familiar with Zechariah 9:10. It's not quoted in the Christian Bible for very good reason. It's not preached in churches for very good reason. Because Zechariah 9:10 tells us that God is going to cut off, in the sense, remove the chariots from Ephraim and the horses from Jerusalem. Well, there you go. There's the contrast between the donkey in verse 9 and the horses in verse 10. I mean, Jerusalem will have peace, will be peace. The bow of war is going to be utterly removed. So, and he will speak, this he is referring to Mashiach. He will speak peace to the nations. That is exactly parallel to what we find in Isaiah 2, in Micah 4. The role of Mashiach is to give chechiach, which means to rebuke the nations so that people will turn back to the God of Israel. There is nothing about the Mashiach performing miracles anywhere in Tanakh, ever. Not once. Dying for it, nothing like that. Eating his body, nothing like that. Drinking his blood, nothing like that. In every passage where the Mashiach is cited, and it should be stated that all Christians agree that these passages are referring to the Messiah. This is not disputed. Christians might quote passages that we don't think is talking about the Mashiach, but this everybody does. It's very transparent. And this, if you want to, like, what is the Messiah going to be like? He is going to be a spiritual and political leader of the Jewish people, and the whole world will listen to him. And the whole world will listen to him. And the result is that there'll be world peace. The implements of war will be transformed into implements of agriculture. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn of war anymore. Out of Zion will go forth the Torah, and the word of Hashem from Jerusalem. And those are the next words. He'll speak peace to the nations. Doesn't say, and he'll come out of a grave. He'll resurrect from the dead. He'll make the blind see. That's an interpolation from Luke 4 that he interpolates into Isaiah 61. It isn't really there. And who will listen to him? Today, you can have a leader in one country say something, but other leaders say, I don't have to listen. People don't have to follow the leaders of other countries, of other nations. But in contrast, the Mashiach is going to be someone that the world will listen to. And his rule be from sea to the west, from the river to the ends of the earth. There it is. So what the church has to do, now, this is not your pastor. Your pastor, I don't know him, is probably a nice guy. This is the way he's been taught, and that's the way his pastor's been taught. They're all taught Zechariah 9:9 because you can have Jesus do that. You can have Jesus coming into Jerusalem in a triumphal entry, and people are waving palm branches because they think it's Sukkot, Festival of Tabernacles. I don't know. So they got the, all right, whatever. Okay. So you've got that, but you could say that somebody rode into a donkey into Jerusalem roughly 2,000 years ago, because as it turns out, it's very likely millions of people have done that. And it's unverifiable. But if Jesus would have brought about the removal of the bow of war from Jerusalem, the horses of war from Jerusalem, if he would have spoken to the nations of the world about peace, and they would have, in turn, not raised up a sword against another nation, we would know it today. If the world peace would have been brought about as the result of the instructions of Jesus, we would know about it today. As it turns out, the Christian religion has produced more bloodshed, more religious war than any other religion in the world. The bloodiest religious war in human history was fought between Protestants and Catholics. It was a war that lasted for 30 years, from 1618 to 1638, thus called the 30-Year War. Germany was wiped out, decimated, the Holy Roman Empire decimated. Now, that war would, the worst, the most. I'm not saying that because I'm bashing Christians today. Please, I'm not doing that at all. But what emerged from the church, you don't have to go to the 17th century, you can walk that back, is a religion that would produce so much bloodshed, so much hatred, so much intolerance. And if those people were not real Christians, then there were no real Christians. They were the most devout Christians. So what is germane for us is to examine the four Gospels, the four Gospels don't all mention the same, they don't agree on many, many things. I know you're going to say it, so yeah, they all agree that Jesus rose from the dead, all that stuff. How he did it, there's a difference because Mark doesn't have resurrection appearances in the real Mark. But I'm not looking for for some way to just throw it. I'm not interested in that. What is striking is that the Zechariah 9 verse 10 is absent not only from the books of the church, but from the minds of the church. It has been stripped from the thinking of the Christian. And the result of the consequences is staggering. What must happen as a result of the coming of Mashiach is a transformation of people, and what specifically? Peace will enter the world. The nations will speak in a pure speech. Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. There's nothing Christian about those passages. The reason why Jews who are knowledgeable and read Christian holy books are repelled by them is not what people think. It's not because we think, oh, virgin birth, how stupid. That's a small time miracle. That would be, in the scheme of things, that would be a very insignificant miracle. What is striking to a person who is immersed in Tanakh to observe in the Christian canonical literature is how different the signature is, how different the message is, how the Jewish scriptures have been just ripped to pieces, like the Jefferson Bible, where Jefferson was a deist, but apparently not a theist to some degree. He believed in God, but he wasn't sure about the miracles, and removed them from his Bible. What the church did was just remove anything from their Bible that would point to one thing, and that is Jesus couldn't possibly be the Messiah. And that's what is happening today. Christians around the world are focusing on Zechariah 9:9, and not 9:10, and not because they're bad people, because they have the worst possible shepherds. They have the worst possible princes. And as the result of that, they are far from God. But there will be a true prince that will come. There will be a true shepherd who is with us, who will bring the Mashiach, the son of David. And please God, we will see that redemption quickly in our time.
Fantastic. Fantastic. That is truly profound. Okay, moving on to this next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. You are live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from. Caller, we'll wait for you.
Hi.
Oh, there you go. You're live on the air. How are you today?
Hi. This is Shoshana Friedman.
Hi, Shoshana. How are you?
Fine. I want to ask Tovia a simple question.
Sure.
How will we know Elijah when he comes? Got it?
Oh, yeah, of course. So he's
Okay.
going to have a great question.
Thank you,
very
Shoshana.
much.
Go ahead and hang up now. You can tune in for the answer, okay? Thanks. All right, there you go. Take it away.
The question is, how will we know when Elijah comes? The answer is conveyed clearly, like brightly, in the very last book of the prophets. The very last of the prophets was Malachi. Malachi is very consumed with the priest doing his job, the priests doing their job, because they are, in essence, they are the messengers of God. See Malachi chapter 2, verse 7. Malachi is very consumed with the idea of justice and addressing people who fear that justice is not with us. See the last passage of Malachi chapter 2. Malachi chapter 3 and 4 address that issue in total. And I say 3 and 4 is because in a Jewish Bible, there is no chapter 4. Excuse me, in a Jewish Bible, there's a chapter 4 which takes over after 3:18, and the Christian Bible just keeps going. The role of Elijah the prophet, it literally says, days are coming, Elijah the prophet will come during this great and terrifying time of the world. He is going to bring about justice to the world. He's going to, in essence, in summing up, the role of Eliyahu Hanavi is to bring justice to the world, to call out to the world that they should repent, and they will listen to him. Now, there will be people, there will be groups, 2 groups, we are told in Zechariah 13, verse 8 and 9, who will turn their back on the message. They'll be destroyed. But a third part will listen. That is always, those passages are always mistranslated. It's not 2/3 and a third. It's wrong, all wrong. Even though a lot of nice people mistranslate it that way. Back. So Malachi is there to restore justice, family unity, the nation going back to Chorev, Remember the Torah that was given to you at Mount Sinai. The role of Elijah the prophet is to usher in the coming of that final day. So that's how we'll know. That's going to be very easy, because he's going to usher in the final redemption. And Elijah was I shouldn't say was, he's alive, is a Kohen, he's a priest. And therefore he's an exceptional priest. So he's going to be the ideal, the paradigm, the perfect ideal Kohen, priest, who's going to be the messenger of God to trigger the nations to do tshuva. There are a number of other things that he'll accomplish, but it's not stated explicitly in the text. And then Mashiach will come. So that's how we'll know. That's how we'll be able to identify Elijah the prophet. That'll be very easy.
Okay, very good, very good. That was short and sweet, to the point. All right, we'll take the next caller. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hello?
Hello, you are live on the air. How are you today?
Hi, my name is Jenny from Illinois.
Welcome, Jenny. How are you?
First of all, I just want to personally thank you both so much for all that you do. I just can't even begin to tell you how thankful I am to God for the truth.
Thank you, sister. That's
and
awesome.
The question is, have you ever heard of carbon dating for determining how old human beings are? For example, in Turkey, they did this test and they used a tool called carbon dating to say that mankind was over 10,000 years old. And I have heard of your teaching on the universe, and I agree with that. It's just that the international community is using this carbon dating to say that man is up to 300,000 years old. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Great. And Jenny, thanks. All right, guys. Rabbi, take it away.
Yeah, I've heard of carbon dating. I'm not aware of any scientist that claims that human beings have been around 300,000 years. I'm not aware of it. Maybe there is someone who says that, and I've just never encountered it. The date normally ascribed is that human beings have been around for 200,000 years. There's a view of about 100,000 years. I believe that was Carl Sagan. I believe it. So the carbon dating measures time. But here's what I think people should consider. If I'm going to take the lowest figure I know about, and that's 100,000 years. If human beings like you and me, with the abilities that we have been around for 100,000 years, which in the evolutionary scheme of things, that's not really a very long time at all. We should ask the question, well, how old is human civilization? It doesn't have to be 100,000, but it might be 50,000 that we know about. Like, when did human civilization begin? When is our record of just cities? What is our earliest human city? Think of every ancient people that's around today. We're not the only ones. There are other nations that are around today that have histories, long histories, that we really know a lot about. And some of them had a lot to do with the Jews, and some of them very little. Egypt. So in reality, people who live in Egypt, about 100, it's the largest Arab country in the world, roughly a population of 100 million people. And in reality, much of the people who live in Egypt, not the ancient Egyptians, Egypt, because it's in a really terrific place, was conquered numerous times, and Egypt is filled with people. The population has been homogenized. Just a red flag up there. But that said, we know a lot about Egyptian history, far more than we know about other places. Well, how far does it go back? Let's take another group that really has very little to do with the Jews. There's some, but not much. The Chinese, they're really a racially distinct group for good reason. There are a lot of them. They got a great piece of land that's very well protected. There's some people who managed to decimate it, Genghis Khan, but they have a lot of them. They swallowed eventually they just swallowed their enemies. How old is Chinese history? Why is it that none of these histories date back more than 6,000 years? How striking. So where is the poetry? Where's the writing? Where's the literature? It doesn't exist. It means first, I want to set this point forth. Every claim out there, any claim that just a lot of people embrace, has some elements which are true, but then the evidence, let me change that. The evidence they're providing is there, but it's just really thin, and the evidence against it is enormous. So if human beings have been around with our cognitive abilities to speak, to write, not something that was, that had other things. I mean, I remember on 60 Minutes, they had elephants painting on canvas. I don't mean that. I'm not referring to other creatures. I'm talking about Adam Rishon, the first human being. If people were around really that long, where are the cities and civilizations that exist? Why is that called prehistoric? Why is anything, I mean, this is a coincidence, what is prehistoric? Really before 6,000 years ago? Why? And most, as I said, believe that human beings have been around for 200,000 years. Well, they never fell in love? Really? Like, there was no Pushkins and Shakespeare and nothing? And cities and civilizations just begin exactly when the Torah says it began? So we don't know the length of the days of creation. We know there are 6 units. And of course, a plain reading would suggest there are 6 days with evening and morning, but that would be a little sophomoric, because we know that the very thing that determines the length of a day, the sun wasn't created to the 4th day. We know that. Why? Because we have a Bible that says so. And the Torah tells us that God created light immediately. It was the first thing. Why? We know now why light would be essential first. But how did the author of the Torah, who moved the hand of Moses, how did he know unless he was God who created everything? So we know now because of what has been discovered in a little bit more than a century, just from the early 20th century. We know how important light is in everything, how light and time are completely intertwined. The things that Newton didn't know, but Einstein figured out. So so what they're saying existed prior, what is displayed from carbon-14 dating does not prove that human beings, as we know, lived then. They're saying that our ancestors of human beings lived then. Tell me when this first walked the earth. That's what we're asking. And this capable of speaking and writing and all that, when did that start? And that was 6,000 years ago. And light is the beginning of everything. And we know that now. And the universe, has a beginning. Science has come to not just accept that, but to promulgate that. So all we're saying is that man has been here for nearly 6,000 years. And what is found through dating is something that is not this. And the evidence for that is huge, because there are no cities. That is before prehistoric, before human civilization. Now, it could be a big coincidence, and for 194,000 years, just no one wrote a book. No one wrote a letter. Nothing. There were no cities. There was no civilization. It could be, and this just exactly when the Torah says, that's when suddenly, pow. What makes humans distinct from all the other creatures in the world. It's not just our brain, but certain ability to speak. There is no other creature on earth that can speak. I mean, speak. They can't. I've heard dolphins, literally, I've been underwater with dolphins when they communicate. They're not speaking in any convention, in our sense. Okay? None of them can write. And maybe most germane, there's not an animal on earth that believes in God except for us, because only human beings are created in the image of Hashem. So, although the claims in the world, they all have evidence, they all have an apologetic for it. It's just their evidence is so thin and torturous compared to the evidence against it. But I think I don't hold Christians accountable for this. But I think because there some of them, and I really respect the fact that they're trying hard to defend Genesis, but I think by them insisting that the first days of creation were 24-hour periods and the universe is 6,000 years old, so what that does, it causes people to lose their faith. That, in my view, and there are other views out there, but I think what we know is that human beings like you and me have been around 6,000 years. And that's it. And now there are people who are listening to me who hold a different view. This is my view. We only know that man, as us, have been around for a little less than 6,000 years. Now, they could measure, one caveat, be very careful. They are often measuring paintings that appear to be drawn by humans. They're not. It's not Rembrandt, but they're paintings on the inside of walls of caves that have been discovered in Australia and the African continent. But what they're measuring there is the material that is used to draw it. If I take a pen that's 1,000 years old, or let's take a pencil. Okay, let's say there was a pencil 1,000 years ago, okay, and I get it, I dig it up, and I draw a deer, or whatever, some antelope, and then in 1,000 years from now, someone comes and measures using carbon dating, how old is the material that was used to write on the side of a cave. It's not going to measure 1,000 years. It's going to measure 2,000 years. So what are you measuring? It's not someone with the New York Times in front of him or her. They're measuring the material. That we don't dispute. So be very careful with that. All right. Anyways, thank you for your question.
Okay, very good. Very good. We'll move on to the next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. You're live on the air. Caller, you there?
Hello, William, yes.
Yes, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
What is the question for Rabbi today?
The question has to do with the information he shared about Matthew and Mark and all of that information. Does he have anything does he have like a YouTube video on that? Or is it on his book, ones 1 and 2?
Well, regarding which topic? I'm sorry, which topic were you talking about? You said Matthew, but I'm not sure what topic
It was the first one that he talked about initially just now.
Okay, where it's talking about the two donkeys versus one donkey and...
Oh yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah.
that. I do discuss that extensively. This specific topic is discussed in volume one, and
Oh,
the
volume one. Okay.
interrelationship between the Gospels I discuss in both my books and in both volumes, and on many YouTube videos, and
Ah.
and so it's really quite plain. There are Christians who have a different view, and even non-Christians who do, but there's really a good reason for understanding that the Book of Mark really was first, and Matthew and Luke copied almost all of
Yes.
Mark, and it's because they copied it. It's very plain that they did. However, there are some less than 300 verses in Matthew and Luke that are virtually identical to Matthew and Luke that appear nowhere in the book of Mark. So
Mark.
they
Okay.
had some common source for that. I mean, unless they took an amazing guess and just happened to write. And not only that, then it's cool that source uh, there's a German word used for that source, and we call that Q. Is the type of
Q. Yeah.
literature found in those 235 verses, whatever it is a certain type. Basically, it's logi, it's sayings of Jesus. So it's not just things all over the place, but it's a type, a genre of literature found in the Gospels that are unique to Matthew and Luke, and then some 90% of the Book of John appears nowhere in the Synoptic Gospels. So this
Okay.
isn't
Excellent.
difficult to extrapolate. Pretty transparent.
Okay, thank you for your call. Go ahead and we'll go to free phone lines. Take it. Bye-bye.
Well,
Okay, and Rabbi, also before we answer this caller, on that topic, you guys, some of you have the books, but maybe they're just sitting on your shelf or whatever. But these things are the way they're laid out is really really easy. My thought on these books, this is volume one. You can see how thick it is. The print's large enough where it's comfortable to read, very comfortable on the eye, as you can see if I can get close enough here. Steady. In the front and back, you have two different index and glossary. The front is designed by topic, and the back is set up for actual verse references. So my rule is, for me, if I can't find it in less than like 2 minutes, 1 minute, using the glossary or the index, it's probably not in here. And you can look for the YouTube resources. But this is a 2-volume book set available at outreachjudaism.org. And you can still get them at Amazon, I believe, Amazon.com. So, okay, caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. You're live on the air. Caller, yes, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you
Yes,
just fine.
we can hear you.
Go right ahead with
What's
your
on-
question.
Hello?
We are here.
Hey there. What's on your mind?
Hello, can you hear me?
He can't hear us.
Yes, I can hear you.
If you're watching this, yes, we can.
So I just
Okay.
have a question for the rabbi.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead, yes.
Go ahead with your question.
Yes, so the question is, if Jesus claims there is no other way to heaven except through me, so does that mean the ancient sages, like for example, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, everyone went to hell? That's correct? Can you please answer
I
that?
could tell your accent. Are you from Bahrain?
Sorry?
Are you from
Yes,
Bahrain?
Bahrain.
Ah,
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, good. All right.
Okay, so-
Assalamu alaikum.
My name is
Nice
John.
to-
Yeah.
John, welcome. Thank you so much for your question.
No, I'm John. I was a Christian, but then I changed to Noahide.
Very good. Very good.
Baruch
Okay, go ahead and hang up now. We can tune in for your answer, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you can answer that question, please.
Absolutely. You got it. Bye-bye. Thanks. All right, Rabbi.
All right, so
Repeat
he's
I didn't hear the question thoroughly. Would you please repeat
I'll
it?
explain to you.
Okay.
So he's asking a very interesting question that has vexed Christians, and Christians have responded to this conundrum variously. I don't want to mischaracterize what Christians say. So the question is asked is, if Jesus died for the sins of the world, and if you believe in him, you're saved, and if you don't, you're going to perish, John 3:16, and everywhere else. So what did people do who died before the first century? How were they saved? So that is discussed a lot among Christian thinkers of what happens to the people who lived earlier, picking one group whose name conveys that there were just different periods where salvation was variously conveyed, are the dispensationalists. And that's what the dispensationalist part of their name means. It means an economy. It means a different time period of how people were saved. The problems of this are staggering because we are told in Tanakh that people were saved, forgiven for their sins, and redeemed because they turned to God and were loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avram Avinu, we are told explicitly in the Torah, in Genesis chapter 26, verse 5. This is not me. It's the Bible. It's not because there's a retrospective redemption through the blood of Christ. No, it's because Abraham was obedient and followed all the commandments of Hashem. He was obedient to God. God, therefore, referred to Abraham as my friend. Isaiah chapter 41, verse 8 and 9. So it's not just that the Torah is silent on this matter, and you can't prove something with silence. The Torah explicitly says that there are all sorts of people who were completely loyal to God, from Yotam, a great king. May not have heard of him very much, and the reason is because he was really just a perfect person, didn't sin, Bible says so, and therefore there wasn't much to speak about. His son was a nightmare. His son was very famous, Achaz. He sinned a lot, so there's a lot of stuff about him. Hezekiah was Achaz's son. He was very righteous. A lot about him because of amazing events during his life. So I don't want to be offensive. If you're a Christian and you're offended easily, don't watch this show. Watch something else. Christianity is a man-made religion, and it is using the background of Judaism, the history certainly, but then taking ideas in the Jewish scriptures and then altering them, producing theologies, teachings, and salvation programs that were only known in the pagan world, but using Jewish language to convey it. So so semantically, they're using Jewish language, using Jewish things, but ontologically, they're not at all. It's completely different. So therefore, Christians have various answers to this question. And what is critical is not that, and this is a very big problem, and why would Jesus come then, 2,000 years ago? Why not earlier? I mean, our first prophet is Adam. And we have prophets that follow Adam, like Noah, really important individuals. Noah would teach, would beg people to repent. They didn't. But he spent a long time on building a ship in the middle of Ohio, meaning if you're going to be able to build a ship of that magnitude, you would build it right by the ocean. And you can imagine for 120 years ago, man, why are you building a ship here? Unfortunately, the generation didn't repent. So it makes a lot of sense why you would have prophets from the beginning. But why would someone die then? And none of it makes sense, because why would an innocent person die for the sins of the wicked? That is contravened, that is opposed by the Jewish scriptures and to our minds. I want to make this point. We human beings are created in the image of God. That's just not just a nice thing to say. It makes us feel good or special, but that means that our value system and God's value system must match really well. We are Bluetooth connected to God, and our cats are not. And we're very aware of God. In order to not believe in God and be an atheist, you've got to have been really hurt by people, and something had to intervene in that belief, because the natural default is to believe. I don't know if this number is correct. Oh, I think that 105 billion human beings lived since creation. A very tiny number that lived before the Torah was given. So Christians have to deal with this variously, but the ideas conveyed in the church are appalling because of what the Torah has to say. Moreover, we're told in the Jewish scriptures that people found favor in God's eyes because they were loyal to God. Daniel was called beloved. These are great people who live. Kalev was a person who was completely loyal to God, and so on. So we'll give it that. So we see in Tanakh that people are loyal to God. Hezekiah, loyal to God. Great man of God. All right. Anyways, thank you for your question.
All right, very good. Moving on. Okay, caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Hello?
Yes, you're live on the air now. Go ahead. Caller,
Can you all hear me?
We can hear you fine. Can you hear us okay?
Oh, now I can. Thank you, William.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, hello, Rabbi, and hello, William. I just want to thank God for the wonderful work that you're all doing, first off. And it's been God sent that I've tapped into your YouTubes when I was crying out to Hashem and giving up that there was no God after being a Catholic many of years, and stopped being a Catholic, being a Seventh-day Adventist, then realizing a lot of non-truth to the point of despair. So I thank God, number one. And the question that I have for Rabbi is, being a Catholic, my mom died as a devout Catholic, my grandmother, who was so faithful, believing that they were serving the true God. I know that you've said before that souls that haven't had a chance to accept Hashem, I don't know if it was a certain age or if it was just Jewish souls, but what happens to those souls that died, that thought that they were devoted to the true God? And it also says when Messiah comes that everyone has to celebrate Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Booths. How is everyone going to fit in Jerusalem? How's the whole world going to fit in Jerusalem? Who's going to come back? Who's going to... Hello?
Yeah, I'm right here.
We're still here for you.
Yeah.
So I don't... And then I start thinking about Moses' father-in-law. He was a priest to who? Why didn't he continue with Hashem once they knew that it was a true God? So all these questions kind of leave me dumbfounded, especially saying we're Noahide, we're all sons of God, but yet where do we worship? Where does this all come? I know he's merciful and loving and he knows our heart, but these are all questions that scare the life out of a lot of people who were in Christianity, especially of their loved ones.
Very good, very good. Okay, just right off the bat, do me a favor before you hang up. Write this number down, because I want you to go to my YouTube channel when you're done and look up this video number. Okay, and
Okay.
The video number is 759. I've got them all numbered. When you go to my channel, every video has a number in the very beginning. This is video number 759. Okay, and it's the last question on that video. And it's at a time marker of 1 hour and 50 minutes and 27 seconds. Once you listen to today's program and listen to Rabbi's explanation for it, he talked about it again on that video as well. So you'll get more information than what you get today if you go see that video as well, okay?
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And may God bless us and keep us in his grace.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Rabbi.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah. So thank you for those questions. I heard many of them. What happens to people who are Roman Catholic until the day they died? I receive that question very often because it's very common for people who were Roman Catholic to wake up from that idolatry and then become Protestant, thinking that they've jettisoned the idolatry because the statues aren't there and the belief in the authority of Rome is not in the Protestant church, and the Mary worship isn't in the Protestant church for the most part. Luther venerated Mary, but to say it isn't. And they think, oh, I'm set now. But there are people who have curious minds who keep pressing on the core issues. The doctrine of the Trinity is almost always goes first. The emperor has no clothes. The doctrine for most of you who are listening to my voice now, who used to be Christians and now worship the God of Israel alone and bow to him alone and pray to him alone, possibly or probably in my large but anecdotal experience has been people see through the doctrine of the Trinity for what it is. And then once that goes, the whole thing collapses. The church is very aware of this vulnerability, and you will get thrown out of church, of your denomination, for questioning the doctrine of the Trinity. Like questioning the doctrine of the Trinity. Because it's not found in the Christian Bible, and because this is what everyone in the church is so insecure about. I've seen it for myself, and for many of you, so have you. So the question was asked is like, what happens to someone who's a Roman Catholic until they die? What happens to their soul? I want to share this with you. We're living in a time of great tribulation right now. At the time of the airing of this show, 47 people have died in Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Dayan Haemes. What do those words mean? A religious Jew says Baruch Dayan Haemes upon hearing about someone who passed away. Baruch Dayan Haemes means blessed is the true judge with a capital J. Because on this world we can't see the heart. We can only judge people based on actions, but we don't know what they're really thinking. We can't take into account all their experiences, what they knew, what they could be held accountable for. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be his name, he knows the thoughts of every man. He has better intelligence than the best Israeli intelligence that can track your cell phone has. He knows every pain you've gone through, every hurt when you were a little girl, when your life was shattered. You were only 7 years old and your innocence was taken from you. He knows that. He knows what you knew and didn't know, what your intent is. And he judges you according to what you knew. And this is a trust. And that's why religious Jews generally stay away from saying, oh, this person went there, that person went there, and we don't talk that way. There's a very, very, very much a real Olam HaNeshamas, we call it a heaven, but it means a world of souls where the soul migrates to after death. Soul can never be destroyed because the Chelik Limal Mamish, it's a part of the divine. God rests in you through here. This is the essence right here. But people want to kiss each other so much, who love each other so much here. It's really that's because I want to feel your soul. I want to encounter you where God encountered you. That's why humans kiss, who love each other with such intensity. And this is conveyed right at the opening of Song of Songs. Yishakein min ashikois pihu, ki toivim doidecha miyoyim. Kiss me with the kisses of thy lips, for the love is better than wine. So we have trust in Hashem that every person, your parents, we judge based on what they knew, what they understood. And Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu has access to this information, and none of that information could in any way change the way we behave. You could and should consider that your parents, your dear mother, grandmother, who obviously were so important to you, that besides the Roman Catholicism, they were conveying, because that's what their mother and father told them and grandfather, but there were things that your mom may have conveyed to you in your life that made you the person who you are, gave you that strength, that inspired you to care for the hungry, to clothe the naked, that inspired you to behave in a certain way. Those are really good things. And I would contemplate those things for their soul. So that's the answer to that question. That's why we say Baruch Dayan HaEmes, blessed is the true judge. And I've been unfortunately saying that a lot in recent weeks, because the United States is being hit much harder than Israel is. Hashem Yirachim, God have mercy. New York, in the greater New York area, is a hotspot where death is ubiquitous. It's a very, very, very grave matter there. Can't keep up with the numbers. A very, 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 very serious problem. Italy hit very, very hard. We say Baruch Dayan HaEmes first, that God is the true judge. He understands. He knows the heart. Now, the other question I heard through all that was Zechariah in chapter 14, where we are told that it's chapter 14, verse 16, where we're told that all the surviving nations, those who are loyal to Hashem, and that would be the third, last segment that are saved because they are loyal to Hashem, not 1/3 is a number, but the third part, tracing back to Zechariah 13, 8, and 9. So they will come each year, they'll come here to Yerushalayim to celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles, Sukkot. Now, how will God fit everyone in Eretz Yisrael? So I could give you the answer, I think, but you don't need me to tell you that. That would be a very minor miracle. As it turns out, so that everyone, he can, resurrect the dead. He can certainly get everyone to fit in here. You first of all, he could do it, and there is a lot of open, empty space, and those places are going to flourish. But as it turns out, Eretz Yisrael is really much larger than it is today in the Messianic age. Let me just rephrase that. That didn't come out right. In the Messianic age, the borders of Eretz Yisrael are going to be much, much larger. I encourage you to read Ezekiel 46 through 48, the last 3 chapters of the book of Ezekiel. So I'm not. It's way up there. The United Nations are going to go nuts. No, the United Nations... The United Nations are not going to go nuts because they're not going to exist, because the nations will be united over the God of Israel by the Mashiach and Elijah, and they will no longer be guided by that abomination on the east side of Manhattan. That's right. So right now, the United Nations, what will you ever do without that? And that World Health Organization, that turned out to be brilliant. So the world is not going to be guided by them. The nations will unite because of the Haichacha of the Mashiach and Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, who will introduce him. But the size of the borders of Eretz Yisrael will go way up into Lebanon and go way, way east. And the way Yechezkel presents this is essentially what is Israel today, and I mean Israel, really Israel today, will basically be Jerusalem. Jerusalem is going to greatly expand. So, I mean, in physical dimensions, this is really not going to be a problem. But very few people read the book of Ezekiel from beginning to end, or the last segment of the book of Ezekiel, which is devoted entirely to the Messianic age. It's so splendid. It's so enlightening. It's so rich. It just up. It starts up with the divine chariot, and Ezekiel gives away what is prophecy like what is happening when you see the glory and divine presence of God. What is that like? That information is only conveyed at the end of the first chapter of Ezekiel. And then the return of the God's name to this place. So nothing to worry about in that department. That's really all taken care of. And for what it's very clear to me that it's not that Mashiach is soon coming, but it's really here. We are in a messianic process right now. It's unfolding now. We're in it. And just to answer the last possible question that you asked, is the Festival of Tabernacles is key because the covering of the booths, which we see in the Bible, is not just a covering, but it also represents the glory of God. So there are people who trust in a covering that's the glory of Hashem, the Almighty. And there are other people who trust in the roof. In Hebrew, the word roof is a gog. Gog is a really simple Hebrew word, means roof. So the roof, people of the roof, from the land of the roof, read the opening passage of Ezekiel 38. I'm not kidding. So there are people who trust in the physical, reinforced concrete roof, and there are other people who trust in the clouds of heaven. And those who trust in the clouds of heaven will merit to celebrate the festival that marks the clouds of heaven, the divine protection at the end of days. And all of the whole end of Zechariah is all messianic. All of it is. I mean, once you get past the 8 visions in the first handful of chapters, it's essentially, it really is all messianic. Even if you don't see it in 7, it really is. And it really isn't. It really is everywhere. But you gotta unpack it a little bit, and it's really tasty. It's really good. When you unpack Tanakh, unpack the words, what emerges is just diamonds, and the light just goes everywhere. It's really quite special. Thank you for your question.
Very cool. Very cool. Nice, colorful illustration there, Rabbi. Okay, caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. Caller, you're live on the air. Can you hear us okay?
Hello?
Yes, you are live on the air. Welcome. How are you today?
My name is Shimsha from Brooklyn.
Shema, welcome.
Hello?
Welcome.
And I'd like to know how the Messenger responds to the Muslim claim that Isaiah 42 is talking about Muhammad. Kedar is Arab, Mecca is Selah. So that's basically my question. Thank you.
Okay, don't hang up just yet. Rabbi, you got that front to back?
No, I'm not. I didn't understand the question specifically.
Could you reword your question for us, if you don't mind, please?
Isaiah 42, Muslims constantly claim that it's talking about Muhammad.
Okay.
And Kedar mentioned in that chapter is Mecca, Selah is Medina. Whatever. Just wanna hear how Rabbi Singer responds to it. That's
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Go ahead and hang up now. You can tune in for your call. For your answer. Thanks. Bye. Okay, Rabbi, do your best to for me, because I want to put up a question topic on screen. So tell me how to place that, please.
I'm not really sure.
Well, let's see real quickly if
do
Isaiah 42.
Muslims 2 verse 6. Why did they say that is referring to Muhammad?
Right. That'll work. Let's go with that.
Yeah. So really, the people to ask that question is Muslims, like Muslim scholars. So as it turns out, Isaiah 42 is referring to the Bnei Israel. All right, let's talk about the Muslim religion, but I'm not an expert on Islam. There are Muslim scholars out there that I think be more appropriate to address that question too. So the Quran states that if you look at your Torah and your Psalms, your Psalms, that you'll find Muhammad is there. Okay, the consensus view in Islam is that whenever Muhammad makes, or the Quran makes reference to the Torah and the Psalms, it really means all of Tanakh. So Isaiah is a really important example, never is quoted in the entire Quran, never there. But Muslims all believe, that I know, certainly all Sunni Muslims believe, that the book of Isaiah is holy, and Isaiah was a real prophet, and the book is sacred, and it's very useful, and so on. Now, why is this germane? Because Muslims in the early Middle Ages began to ask the question of where then is Muhammad in Tanakh, in the Jewish scriptures. And there was a basically two views that emerged from this. One is that there are a handful of places where there's an allusion to Muhammad, there's an inference of Muhammad. There are about six dots that are really pointing to often, obviously Deuteronomy 18, this passage, Isaiah 42, verse 6, a verse in the book of Song of Songs, chapter 5, verse 15, I believe. So some Muslims began to view these texts as a veiled reference to Muhammad. And another response to why don't you have something really explicit is that the Jews had really corrupted the text, and that the Tanakh that the Jews have in their hands is not the original Tanakh. And the Jews have literally corrupted the text. Now, there are Muslims thinkers really divide on this issue. The early Muslim scholars, meaning those until, let's say, for the first 300 years of the Islamic faith, from Muhammad until, let's just say to Imam al-Tabari, let's just say to that point, the consensus was much stronger that the Jews did not corrupt their text. And many Muslim scholars had questioned that entirely. How is that possible? Every Tanakh in the world is the same. It's not borne out by the evidence. So those views emerged as to solve that conundrum. The view that said that, well, he is there, even in what the Jews have, and the Jews didn't change the text, but just changed the meaning of the text. And so certain passages were then embraced as referring to Muhammad, to the founder, not the founder of the Muslim religion, because that would be very offensive to Muslims, but to Muslims, to the final Rasul of Islam, the final prophet, the seal of the prophets, using the language of. So this passage, Isaiah 42, is one of those. So that's how it came to being, and Muslims across the board believe that these are references, and of course there are a lot of references to Kedar, a lot of references to Ishmael, who is blessed by God in Genesis 16:21, and really who plays a very important, Hagar plays a very important role in her young, very difficult life, but it's beyond the scope of this show. Isaiah 42 is clearly referring to the nation of Israel, because Isaiah 42 identifies the servant specifically as one who is a Brit Am, a covenant nation, not a single individual. And later on in the very same chapter, we have the weaknesses and frailty of this covenant nation. Who is blind but my servant? Same chapter. But earlier on, we are told V'etnecha levris am, which means a covenant nation. Brit Am, a covenant nation. And L'or Goyim, a light to the nations. The role of the Bnei Yisrael is to be a light to the nations. So this is very clearly referring to not everybody, but the remnant that is loyal to Hashem that has been discussed in Isaiah 41, 8 and 9, the chapter prior to it, the chapter after it, Isaiah 43, verse 10, 11, Atem Eidainu Hashem, Avdi Hashem Bacharti, you're my witnesses, declares the Lord, my servant whom I have chosen. So the servant are witnesses, 43, verse 10, and then 44 again, verse 1, and 44, verse 21 again, and then 45, verse 4. You see where this is all going. Okay, so Isaiah is, not all, but Isaiah, I would say 85 to 90% of the book of Isaiah is in poetry, dense poetry. There are chapters that use standard prose and standard narrative, conveying narratives in the same sense that you would find in the book of Samuel or Kings, but there's not a lot of that in the book of Isaiah. It's better for Muslims to comment on why they believe Isaiah 42 is speaking about Muhammad than it's better it is with them than me, because they can much better make a case for it. I mean, from their view. But in truth, if you read the chapter in context and read it straight through, and you see that this servant is a Brit Am, it's a covenant nation. A covenant nation. It's not a covenant to the nation. And many translators render this completely wrong, like a covenant to the people or a covenant of the people. So like the servant is, no, it's a covenant, the Brit Am. It's not Brit La'am. It doesn't say Brit La'am. That's really important. It says the Brit Am, not Brit La'am. And that's how it's usually mistranslated. And that can get everyone in a lot of trouble. And then that the servant would be a light to the nations. Well, we have an exact phrase in Isaiah 49, which has identified the servant as Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. Again, not all the Jews, not Bernie Madoff. It's those who are loyal to Hashem in Isaiah 49, verse 6. And guess what? Isaiah 49, 6. So there it is. You have the Bnei Yisrael, the servant, the role is to be an Or LaGoyim. Exact same words. And so all you do is take Isaiah 42, verse 6, and Isaiah 49, verse 6, and just go, oh, okay, that clears that up. So that's my best version of what, in my view, how Muslims struggled with this. The person I referred to, Imam al-Tabari, I think he was in my view, and in the view of, I think, most Sunni Muslims, although Imam al-Tabari was born in what's today Iran, he was Sunni. And I think he was the brightest Muslim commentator that they ever had. And then his view was that the text of the Jewish scriptures is intact, and the text was not corrupted. He was a prolific writer. He lived a very long time. I think he died, he was about 86 years old. So, and he's called the dean of the tafsir. What I'm expressing to you, that the text is intact and never been corrupted, is not, the view of someone who is Jewish and not a Muslim in a conventional sense, but really is was a consensus view at certain different times. And what might have happened is that at times, politics plays a big role in the Islamic world. The whole Shia-Sunni split was the result of politics and nothing else. There were religious differences that developed, but it was developed as a result of politics. So in some sense, perhaps, I thought about this, that the view that the texts in the Jewish scriptures were corrupted, God forbid, by the Jews is more popular. The Jews would do such a thing when Jews and Muslims are not getting along as well. I don't know. But so that's where these places come from. They're, even by Muslim standards, they're inferences. But if you look at the text in context, it's talking about the Bnei Israel, not all the children of Israel, but rather those who are loyal to God, who are the righteous remnant that are described explicitly in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 12 through 16. And I would encourage you to look there. So thank you for your question.
Great. I know it's been a long-standing question by so many, even not just Muslims, but also Christians themselves have the same accusation that the Jewish people have corrupted the scriptures to try to hide Jesus. So it's interesting.
And corrupted the actual text?
Yeah, or corrupted corrupted
the interpretation?
Yeah,
the
interpretation to kind of cover up the idea that it could have been Jesus. So.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Of course. That goes back really old. And
right.
That goes back to Paul. That there's just the veil and the scales. That's 2 Corinthians 3 and 4. Oh,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Because we think it's foolish, it must be true.
Right.
Mind blowing. Anyways, let's go back.
Okay. Very good. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Hi. My name's Jamie. I'm calling from Boston.
Welcome, Jamie.
I had a brief question. This is something that's confused me for a while. It's about the relationship between Christianity and Torah Sheba'al Peh, and I've read a bunch of different explanations of this. And
so the Christians and the oral law, just in case.
Yes, sorry, I should have
said
that. So the relationship between Christianity and the oral law. So it seems like if you read the Christian Bible, there's sort of this pattern of Jesus does something, the Pharisees tell him he shouldn't do that, and then he explains to them why they're wrong. And then the overwhelming majority of the time, or at least a lot of the time, it seems to me, it's something on the Sabbath. So Luke 6, I think, was the example I thought of, where he goes out, picks corn, and they say, you can't do that on the Sabbath. You can't pick corn on the Sabbath. And I'm wondering, well, where the heck did they get that? Or the other one in John chapter 5, where Jesus says, pick up the mat and walk, and then they say, well, you can't do that because it's the Sabbath. But then my question is, it seems like then Christians at least should regard the oral law as authoritative, because it seems to be referenced several times in the Christian Bible. But for some reason, I don't know of any Christians who study Gemara. So I guess my question is sort of, if you want to phrase it this way, why aren't there Christians who are studying Gemara right now in the same way that they study Genesis? So, does that make sense?
Yeah, and not only does it make sense, I waited quite a number of years for someone with your sharp mind to ask that very important question. That's a great question.
Okay.
And thank you, and be safe.
Thank you, Jamie. Go ahead and hang up now. You can tune in for the answer, okay? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what is the best way to for me to title that question? Because there's a lot of aspects to it.
Why do Christians reject the oral law?
Whenever it's listed through the... Yeah, okay, that's good like that. Okay.
Just there.
Yeah, okay. All right, very good. Go ahead, Rabbi.
Real easy. Not only do I have an entire, fairly long chapter going through the oral Torah, what is it, and why does the church reject it? I think I wrote that chapter in like one night. I was up all night and wrote. It's pretty. I go through a lot in that chapter, and I cover that. It's a really important issue, and I cover it from every angle because it's so rarely touched upon. Oral Torah, what is that? Well, you know what the words mean, but what is conveyed? So when the Almighty gave us the commandments in the Torah, there's very few detail of like how to slaughter an animal the way I showed you, Deuteronomy 12:21. This month shall be which month? By what standard shall be to you the first of the months? How do words what do they mean? Because there are no vowels in the Hebrew consonantal language. And if you change the vowels, not only will it sound different, but it'll mean something very different. In English, to make that easy for you, if I took an English sentence in the English language and just removed every vowel, I could change those vowels and it would be grammatically correct. It would mean something completely different. There is a large cut on my hand conveys something strikingly different than there's a large cat on my hand. And I can just play with one vowel and it means something. It's considerable. You could do that. So that's all oral Torah. The oral Torah tells like what are the details of you're supposed to wear frontlets on your. Well, what are those, and who's obligated to do that? And do women have to wear tzitzis? And you should take a beautiful fruit. Well, what fruit would that be? The reason why people doubt the oral law is they never tried to keep the written law. So if you are in Louisiana and you never tried to keep any mitzvot, ritual mitzvot, yeah, it is just all in the theoretical. So you're like these guys in the lab. It's theoretical. You're not in the hospital. You're not trying to actually do it. But you can't do it unless you have the oral Torah. And in fact, groups that rejected the oral Torah because it began with always a political discord, they had to invent their own traditions, but called traditions and not oral Torah. I want to get back to the heart of your question, because if you had said to the earliest Christians, and I say earliest, I want to refine that. I don't mean really earliest Christians, meaning people who live Christians between 30 and 50, but just first century Christians. If you had said to them that there is no oral tradition, they would have thought you're nuts. And that's eminently clear from the Gospels that are all written in the first century. We really know that. Why is not germane right now, but all the Gospels were written, except for a few later, there are later interpolations, they're all written then. And as you said brilliantly, the oral Torah is everywhere. You're right, Jesus is arguing with his interlocutors at almost every juncture, really at every juncture, are Jews. And the argument almost always surrounds the observance of Sabbath. Whether you could heal on Sabbath, whether you could cause an incision on Shabbos, if you're allowed to make a cut on somebody on Shabbos, that comes up. That is nowhere found in the Torah. Therefore, perhaps a prohibition against performing circumcision on Shabbat, which would require such an incision. And the oral Torah, which conveys to us that there's an exception for a baby on the 8th day, that you can't perform a circumcision. That's big. And that comes up in the Christian Bible. And please, Christians, don't get angry at me. They have no clue how to interpret John 7. Because it's used as there's a rabbinic thinking called kal v'chomer. Well, if this is permissible, then surely that is permissible. And if this is forbidden, surely that is forbidden. That's it's that type of logic. Kal v'chomer means proving something light from something heavier. So if in the state of Texas, you're not allowed to operate a motor vehicle with a blood alcohol level of 0.08, then you certainly can't operate a motor vehicle with a blood alcohol level of whatever, 0.1. Then you really can't. So that's for sure. You don't need that. It's whatever. So that type of thinking is in Tanakh. It's very logical, and it's used in the Gospels all over because Orthodox Judaism was the only form of Judaism that was respected by the early Christians. In fact, it says so. It's not just that Christians teach and preach that Jesus emerged from a Pharisaic background, which means Orthodox Jewish background, but Paul proudly says that he was the smartest boy in the class and a Pharisee of Pharisees, the top Orthodox Jew, repeatedly. Galatians 1, Philippians 3, it's all over the place. That's the gold standard. And it is the Orthodox Jews, Pharisees, just an anachronism, that believe in the written and oral Torah and the New Testament, even when being incredibly critical of the Jews, and it is very critical, and really only of the Jews. There's some exception, it really is only of the Jews. Gentiles are like dummies, they just don't get it right, and let me straighten that Samaritan lady out. She doesn't get it. But it's the Jews that have it right. In fact, even in that context of John 4. We are told specifically that the Pharisees and scribes, which for our purposes is the same thing, the Orthodox Jews sit in the seat of Moses. Whatever they tell you, follow, because what they have is directly from Moses. Now they're acting really bad, so do as they say, but don't do as they do. And then Matthew 23 just screams at a screed. So this is against the Pharisees. So this is, I'm really picking the worst, the most unfavorable caricature of the Pharisees in the Christian Bible, this whole chapter. So I'm not cherry picking something like the worst nightmare of a chapter that brought us a lot of problems. The chapter ends with an accusation that the Jews are responsible for all the innocent blood, for every murder. The Jews are responsible for it. Even Abel. We weren't even around then, but we were somehow. I'm not making that up. See the end of Matthew 23. That's why Christians fill their minds with this stuff, and I understand why they hate us. If I'd read that stuff, I'd hate me too. Even in Matthew 23, we are told that the information the Pharisees have is directly from Moses and have that authority. Whatever, don't do as they do, but their information is the gold standard. The oral Torah is everywhere in these stories, and that's what the Gospels convey. The Synoptic Gospels contain a lot of stories and some small speeches of Jesus. John is different because there's a lot of huge dialogues, enormous dialogues, with no parallel to the Synoptics. Stories, but massive, massive dialogues. But that's why we have in those dialogues Jesus using the oral Torah in order to show why he is correct. So in John 7, as an example, well, first I'll explain a point. So normally you would not be able to make an incision in someone's body on the Sabbath. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. But a bris milah, a circumcision, you must do it perform on the 8th day. So if a child is born on Shabbos and that boy is healthy on the following Shabbat, you perform the circumcision. You can't make an incision, but there's a special dispensation through the oral Torah. It's not apparent anywhere in the written Torah. This is explained, very, very famous Mishnah. You can perform a circumcision. You do, not can, you must perform a circumcision on the 8th day if the baby is healthy. And even if it's on Shabbat. So it is astounding to Christians, not to me, because I've gone through the material, that Jesus uses the Mishnah, which hasn't been written yet, to prove that he's correct. And Jesus is being condemned for healing somebody on the Sabbath. That's the context. And then those bad Pharisees come over and they essentially, how are you allowed to heal a person's body on the Shabbat? And Jesus then says, well, if you can heal just one small limb of the body in the case of circumcision, why can't you heal the entire body? Stop. If you ask a Christian, what does that mean? What is he talking about? They're not bad people. They just would not be able to explain that. Why? Because it rests entirely on a Mishnah which has not yet been codified, meaning the oral Torah. I should just explain that in this period, in the 1st and 2nd century, what had been oral up till now was already being written down in note taking. Even before the 1st century, Jews were going through a really bad time, and then certain innovations had to brought to bear because things had to be written down lest they were forgotten. As a footnote, the experience with Rome was much worse than anything we experienced with Babylon, Persia, or Greece. That was just a nightmare. The destruction of the Second Temple was a horror. It was just a very, very terrible event. For now, take my word for it. It was much worse than what the Jews went through with Nebuchadnezzar in every way. So there was an imperative to start to write down what was until then student to disciple, father to son teaching. Those notes of the oral Torah, which were already being written at that time, were compiled by a man named Rabbi Huda Nasi. He's called Judah the Prince, affectionately known as Rebbe, in about the year 200. And that is called the Mishnah, and that is the centerpiece of the Talmud. And then their students, later generations, would then add their comments and thoughts on what their teachers had said, and that's then all codified in the Talmud in a final edition in 500. Wasn't the Talmud was written in the year 500? That's dumb. Everybody says that in the secular books. It's just wrong because they're not studying it, but it's edited and put together. And same way Yehuda Nasi is editing and put together and separating out texts that belong in the Mishnah, other texts that belong in other types of texts called the Brisa, not germane. Okay, but I go through this. So the key is that the earliest written record besides Tanakh of the oral Torah is in the Christian Bible, ironically. No one in the time the New Testament written thought that the oral Torah was made up. And you have this case after case. That Kal v'chomer, proving something heavy from something lighter, if that's true, then this is surely true, is a part of Jewish thinking going back all the way through Tanakh. It's a very clear system of logic. Now, the question then is, well, what happened? How did it get jettisoned? So, as it turned out, Christians relied on the oral law of the Jewish people. For example, where are we in right now? The Christians call it Holy Week, Palm Sunday, and then a week later, Easter. Well, this will surprise many of the viewers that early Christians fought over when Easter was supposed to be celebrated. And the first thing they did is they went to the Jews and wanted to know from the Jewish calendar, and it's all oral Torah, the Jewish calendar oral Torah, of when is Nisan, and then when is the 14th day or 15th day of Nisan. The reason why they celebrated that variously is because, according to the synoptics, Jesus was crucified on the 15th day of Nisan, that is the first day of Passover, and according to John, Jesus was crucified on the 14th day of Nisan, the eve of Passover. Big difference. And Christians would celebrate their Passover based on the Jewish calendar, which is based on the Oral Torah. Now, I know what you're thinking, and I'll just do this 60-second version of this. You're going, what do you mean the calendar is, or Jewish calendar is oral Torah? There are 12 months, and each, when the month is over, there's a new moon, and bing, bing, there you go. What do I need oral Torah for that? Couldn't be anything that doesn't. So you really need it for the Jewish calendar. Without it, you're gone. That's why Christians rely on it. Well, why do I need it? Well, as it turns out, the Jewish calendar is not a pure lunar calendar. The Muslim calendar is a pure lunar calendar. The problem is that the Torah tells us specifically that Passover, for example, must come out in the springtime. Deuteronomy 16, verse 1. Can I say that again? The 15th day of Nisan must come out in the springtime. Must. Okay. Well, that presents a problem. Why? Because the lunar calendar does not determine the season. Because the lunar calendar is, so the average month of a lunar calendar is 29 and a half days. The solar calendar is 365 and a quarter days, which means that the lunar calendar is 11 and a quarter days approximately shorter than the solar calendar, which means that every year, if you just follow the lunar calendar, you would lose 11 and a quarter days. How long would it take for Passover to come out in the winter? Very, very short time. In fact, it would only take 16 years for it to be coming out the opposite side of the calendar. We just keep flying around. That's why Ramadan can come out anytime, because it doesn't make a difference. And if you do the math, it would just take 32 years to go around the whole side. We can't do that. So an extra month has to be, it's called the intercalation, has to be added at certain intervals so that Passover always comes out in the spring. Well, how often, when do you add an extra month? Because this might come as a surprise to you. It doesn't say anywhere in Torah you should have 12 months. Nowhere. Well, adding that in is very complicated. It's based on oral Torah of the precise length, of the average length, obviously, of a lunar month. And the average is not 29.5. It's about 29.5. But it's 29.5, and in addition to that, we are told, in the oral Torah, it's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. We know this from the oral Torah, that the precise length is that, it's 29.5, and then we have the 13th hour. You take the 13th hour, and you divide it up into 1,080 parts, and then it's 796 of 1,080, okay? Well, what do you do with a fraction? So you would just convert 29.5 plus 796 over 1080 into a fraction, which would come out to 29.53059. Well, as it turns out, that's great. It's the most accurate calendar in the world. That's all Torah. So Christians would come to the Jews and say, tell us, when do we celebrate Easter? Meaning, tell us when your Jewish calendar says that now what happened? This is now to answer your question in full. What happens? The church fathers were not fond of the Jews. In the United States, they would not go to prison. In Canada, they would have, because the United States hate speech is not a crime in America, but it is in Canada, in Austria. And they were all virulent anti-Semites, every one of them right down. There wasn't a nice non-Jew. It was just, they weren't there. Okay? They were all like spitting anti-Semitism. And this is really early stuff, 2nd century. It was just horrible stuff. If you had ever expressed anything that Ignatius said about the Jews or Irenaeus said about the Jews, you would be fired from your job. You wouldn't go to jail in America, but you certainly would. It's not David Duke. It was much worse than that. Killing God. Melito, you know, all that is. We have his, look at that. We're right there. We have his Passover speech about the Jews and the charges that we killed God. All right. So now let's tie this together. So as you can imagine, the church is becoming more and more uncomfortable with determining their holiest day on the calendar based on the oral Torah that only the Jews had. You could see that. And so there's a massive split in the church on what day Easter should be celebrated on. The number one, there was so many different groups. There were those who held that it was celebrated on the 14th day of Nisan. That was a big group. Others, the 15th day of Nisan, because the synoptics have it. Others said on the Sunday of the Passover week. If I tell you this war nearly just destroyed the whole church, they were going to kill each other. And these are not my words. This is this is of this a lot of surviving churches. Historians tell us all about. We have a lot of information about this. This war goes to the Council of Nicaea, where everyone thinks that the council convened in 325 by the Emperor Constantine was all about solving the dispute over the nature of the deity of Jesus. It's true. That's very famous. But this was put on the table. And we got to vote on this because as it emerged, all this hate was about the Jews have an oral Torah and we have no access to it. So think. That means that the Jews are God's instrument as a vessel, as an oracle to convey God's truth. And we have to go to them. But we've been proclaiming they're an accursed people. They're the worst people in the world. They're the devil. Do you understand? So to the church, they're increasingly becoming utterly uncomfortable with the notion that we're going to the Jews. These are the Christ killers. They killed God. Read Melito's, that's 2nd century, his screed on the Jews. The copyright is over. It's on the internet. Read it. What he accuses the Jews. So you know that I'm not spicing this up. So once we are in the 4th century and we now have a Christian emperor, Constantine converts in 312. So even the idea increases over the view that we should not go to the Jews at all on this and not use a Jewish calendar anyway. It doesn't make a difference if it's the 14th day, 15th day, Sunday of the week that the Jews say. If it involves going to the Jews, we can't do that. They're the most evil people. And therefore we have to reject, this is a view, a very strong view that emerges in Rome and in the empire, that we can't have anything, we cannot rely on the Jews for anything. And therefore the oral law is the tradition that has transmitted from Moses. The Jews can't be the people that are transmitting it because the Jews are accursed. The Jews can't be an oracle for God's truth. So this is huge. And it is settled in Nicaea. And Constantine himself writes a letter throughout the empire. Remember, Constantine is presiding at this station. He's presiding over the East and the West. And that's going to continue until the end of the 4th century, till, through Theodosius's rule. So he said that this letter is available. I have the whole letter in volume 1, where Constantine was a virulent anti-Semite, hated Jews. I mean, really wasn't fond of us. When I say he didn't like Jews, I don't mean he was like David Duke. He just Jews were the worst thing in the world. And his letter, he proclaims exactly what I told you. So just so you know, I'm not trying to characterize the church and this decision in a way that's unflattering. Constantine says that I'm paraphrasing that, should we really rely on these enemies and these devilish people when to consecrate our most holy day? That's the whole point. So once you say that the Jews are of the devil, then ultimately they draw the logical conclusion, that is, that there can be an oral tradition, because if there's an oral tradition, the Jews are the only ones who have access to it, And they're the people of the devil, and God would never entrust his holy oracles to the Jews. It must be the church. And it's that development, more than any other development, there are others, but that development of over the count of the Jews would then bleed out to, we reject the oral Torah of the Jewish people entirely. And crazy that to this day, Christians still embrace it, and they're not even, they're not Catholics, they're not fans of Constantine's personality, but this nightmare, this self-inflicted wound is still in the church. And the more people call themselves Messianic, the more they hate the oral Torah. Whereas, your nice Christian who's going to some Baptist church in Big Sandy, Texas, he doesn't know about this. And if you go to some Baptist church, a lot of Baptist churches there, I've been there. They don't know about this. They don't know. Maybe there is, because they haven't poisoned. The Messianic movement is really very anti the oral, unless they can use the oral Torah to rescue Christianity from all of its untruths, and then they'll have no problem with using the Talmud. So there's the picture. There are many issues, but this was the big one. If there is no such thing as a Jewish calendar, Jews don't have an oral tradition on it, then that means the oral tradition was invented by the Jews, and what matters only is, well, that time it was very much Catholicism. So, of course, the traditions of the church played a very big role in what Christians considered to be the Word of God, or divine information, as well as the text, and that would display itself in both the East and the Western churches. Anyways, thank you for that very interesting question.
Awesome. Well, Rabbi, it's been a full show for sure. We are out of time, so thank you all for the callers. Had some great questions, and looking forward to the follow-up. And also, I've got some feedback that the live stream broke up a little bit on YouTube. Well, I've got a hard copy recorded on my computer. I will upload that as soon as we're done. And I'll have it numbered appropriately, so you'll be able to know which one is the good one, which is the better video to watch, okay, and share. So, but again, Rabbi, thank you so much for your time. Had a great time going over all of your answers, and so I look forward to go back and see that again. For all you viewers out there, there's a new access video for topics. If you look up on my YouTube channel, there's just search in Tanakh Talk and just type in the word Tanakh Talk and then Master List, and you'll see videos pop up. There probably will be about 10 or 12 eventually, all with the same title but numbered 1 through 10 or whatever. On each video description area, you'll see a list of about 40 different topics and hyperlinks that will project you directly to the question, no matter where the video is located. And so this will be a great resource for you guys to find easier to find questions and stuff. So questions and answers. So with all that said, what we mentioned earlier, you can find Rabbi's books at outreachjudaism.org. You can also get them on Amazon, and there's a few other resources here placed for you, some counter-missionary work. Judaism and Christianity, A Contrast by Rabbi Stuart Federow. Jason LaCrosse wrote a book, Revealing Matthew's Secrets. It's very, very intriguing. And Leaving Jesus is one of my, that was the last book that I read before I finally said, yep, that's it. I'm leaving. Leaving Jesus. So James Wood Jr. So that's it. So Rabbi, thank you again for your time. And I look forward to seeing you and everybody else next week, Hashem willing. And y'all have a great week. Thank you.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. אני אתה אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד. חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. חושבים דוברים לובשים בכל האופנים, זה טבעם חופשית בכל האופנים, זה פתיחם של אנשים שונים.
נזכור בסוף כולנו שותפים,
חשוב תמיד להיות אנושיים.
אני אתה אתם תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, שאיפה והכמיהה